Hello, friends, and welcome to episode 1194 of the Juicebox Podcast. Katie is a 41-year-old type 1 who was diagnosed when she was 12 years old. She's the mother of 2 girls, and while she'd rather not have type 1 diabetes, she says it has changed her life in many positive ways. Nothing you hear on the Juicebox Podcast should be considered advice, medical or otherwise. Always consult a physician before making any changes to your healthcare plan. When you place your first order for AG1 with my link, you'll get 5 free travel packs and a free year's supply of vitamin D. Drink ag1.com/juicebox. Don't forget to save 40% off of your entire order at CozyEarth.com. All you have to do is use the offer code JUICEBOX at checkout. That's JUICEBOX at checkout to save 40% at CozyEarth.com. If you're a U.S. resident who is a type 1 or has a loved one with a type 1 that you care for, please go to t1dexchange.org/juicebox and complete the survey. Your answers to simple questions will help move type 1 diabetes research forward. t1dexchange.org/juicebox. And check out the private Facebook group, Juicebox Podcast, Type 1 Diabetes. This episode of the Juicebox Podcast is sponsored by US Med, usmed.com/juicebox, or call 888-721-1514. US Med is where my daughter gets her diabetes supplies from, and you could too. Use the link or number to get your free benefit check and get started today with US Med. Today's episode is sponsored by Medtronic Diabetes, a company that's bringing together people who are redefining what it means to live with diabetes. Later in this episode, I'll be speaking with Mark. He was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at 28. He's 47 now. He's going to tell you a little bit about his story. And then at the very end of the episode, you can hear my entire mini interview with Mark. To hear more stories from the Medtronic Champion community or to share your own story, visit medtronicdiabetes.com/juicebox and check out the Medtronic Champion hashtag on social media. This show is sponsored today by the glucagon that my daughter carries, Gvoke HypoPen. Find out more at gvokeglucagon.com/juicebox.
Hi, I am Katie. I'm a mom of 2 girls, 10 and 12, and I work for a marketing communications firm doing HR and team planning. And I live in Northern Virginia. Been on the East Coast most of my life. And I've been diabetic for 29, pushing 30 years. I'm currently 41. So
You were diagnosed when you were 12?
I was 12.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
It was a rough year. You know, all the things, all the girl things and diabetes all in the same year. It was awesome.
Can imagine.
Really fun. Yeah.
I am going to start a little differently with you than I do with some people.
Okay.
So some people send me notes, like, there's an intake form when you're going to be on the podcast, and it asks some very simple questions. And some people are vague. Some people are thoughtful. You were really complete, I thought. Like, it felt like to me, and you'll tell me if I'm wrong, it felt like to me you sat down and the things that you've been experiencing your whole life were at your fingertips. You didn't have to sit and wonder why I wanted to be on a podcast. You were just like, I have this attitude. Here's some things that have gone wrong. Here's some things where I've struggled. Here's some things that I went well. It seems like it flowed out of you. Am I right about that?
Yes, that's an interesting observation. And I guess I'm surprised that you don't get that more often. That's not typical.
I think some people are nervous.
Yeah.
And some people's long form thoughts come off crazy. Yours didn't. And I don't mean, for anybody who's been on the podcast before, I don't mean crazy in a bad way. I mean frenetic. Like, it almost feels like everything sucks, or I'm really having trouble with this. You can almost feel that frenetic feeling in their writing. Yours really just felt to me like you sat down and you're like, I know who Katie is. I know what her problems and her successes are. Here they are. I hope I can come on the podcast. That's what it felt like.
I appreciate that. And I do feel that way. I feel that way, I don't know, maybe in my 40s about life, but specifically diabetes, especially what I've seen in the last few years, kind of solidified my feeling of glass half full view of it. I truly believe that diabetes has given me more than it's taken away from my life.
Wow.
And it plays out constantly, all the time, almost 30 years later.
I've seen this conversation a number of times over the years.
Yep.
I'd love to have it on the podcast. I don't know that I do very often. So I see it a lot online where someone will say, on a Facebook group, I feel like I've learned so much from diabetes. I, of course, don't want it, but here are all the things I know that I don't think I would have known if I didn't have it. And so, the lessons probably came forever, but where do you think you began to appreciate them?
College. So I was 12. My parents, and I'm so grateful for this. Again, hindsight being 2020 and looking back, I'm so grateful at 12, and I see this a lot in the newly diagnosed space, parents, in my opinion, doing too much. But they were 12 and basically said, we will help you through this, but this is your journey. You have to figure it out for yourself. They never gave me one injection. I did it all. And it was very much, and that's how we were raised. But I think specifically on this, they saw there was more power in there was more strength in empowering me to be able to do it than walking me, like being a part of all of it. Does that make sense? Like they were very much supportive, but they also said, you have to do this yourself. You have to figure out what this means for yourself. You have to figure out how you change your life. And even I was joking with my mom recently, at the very beginning, they stopped, again, this was back in 1996. So at the very beginning, they stopped eating, they took the sugar cereals away and there wasn't as much ice cream because they felt bad about almost, it's just typical that I would feel the same way as a parent, almost like felt bad. But then there was a point where all those things came back in because they taught me to figure it out myself and have my own opinions about it. And as soon as I did, they could live their life too. It wasn't, and I understand, especially now as a parent, the other side, which I see so much of, where everybody changes everything for the diabetic. Everybody changes everything about their lifestyle. And in some ways, from a health food perspective, that's a wonderful thing. And I'm not saying that's wrong, but I do think there was something about this is my journey and my parents were there to support it, but it didn't have to affect everyone. It didn't have to be a negative thing for anyone else.
Right. So before you go any farther, I want to pick through that because I think there's a lot in there to go through.
Okay.
So diabetes comes with a lot of things to remember. So it's nice when someone takes something off of your plate. US Med has done that for us. When it's time for Ardent supplies to be refreshed, we get an email. Rolls up and in your inbox says, "Hi, Arden. This is your friendly reorder email from US Med." You open up the email, it's a big button that says, "Click here to reorder," and you're done. Finally, somebody taking away a responsibility instead of adding one. US Med has done that for us. An email arrives, we click on a link, and the next thing you know, your products are at the front door. That simple. usmed.com/juicebox or call 888-721-1514. I never have to wonder if Arden has enough supplies. I click on one link, I open up a box, I put the stuff in the drawer, and we're done. US Med carries everything from insulin pumps and diabetes testing supplies to the latest CGMs like the Libre 3 and the Dexcom G7. They accept Medicare nationwide, over 800 private insurers, and all you have to do to get started is call 888-721-1514 or go to my link, usmed.com/juicebox. Using that number or my link helps to support the production of the Juicebox podcast. Right now, we're going to hear from a member of the Medtronic Champion community. This episode of the Juicebox podcast is sponsored by Medtronic Diabetes. And this is Mark.
I used injections for about 6 months, and then my endocrinologist in the Navy recommended a pump.
How long had you been in the Navy?
8 years up to that point.
I've interviewed a number of people who have been diagnosed during service, and most of the time they're discharged. What happened to you?
I was medically discharged. 6 months after my diagnosis.
Was it your goal to stay in the Navy for your whole life, your career?
It was, yeah. Yeah. In fact, I think a few months before my diagnosis, my wife and I had that discussion about, staying in for the long term. And, we'd made the decision despite all the hardships and time away from home. That was what we loved the most.
Was the Navy a lifetime goal of yours?
Lifetime goal. I mean, as my earliest childhood memories were flying, being a fighter pilot.
How did your diagnosis impact your lifelong dream?
It was devastating. Everything I had done in life, everything I'd worked up to that point was just taken away in an instant. I was not prepared for that at all.
What does your support system look like?
Friends, your family, caregivers, for me, the Medtronic Champions community, all those resources that are out there help guide the way, but then help keep abreast on, the new things that are coming down the pipe and to give you hope for eventually that we can find a cure.
Stick around at the end of this episode to hear my entire conversation with Mark. And you can hear more stories from Medtronic Champions and share your own story at medtronicdiabetes.com/juicebox. The first thing that I'm always interested in, this is, by the way, you're just the foil for this today because you're bringing it up. Like, this isn't something I'm like, oh, Katie has said something I've never heard before. I've heard a lot of people say this, but I'm always really interested in it. And I think you might be the right person to dig through it with. So when you say they didn't, they weren't involved for very long and they said, like, this is on you, you need to figure out your thing. Is it possible that there wasn't really very much to do 29 years ago?
Yeah,
right.
For sure. There was a lot less to do. Mm-hmm. That being said, there was also a lot less ability to micromanage it. They were given, again, if you put yourself now, it's totally different.
Yeah.
Parents are given 1,000 things, and I think it's too much. I think we've gotten to a place where, and you've heard and talked about many times on the podcast, the mental health toll of the parents and the families, not to mention the kid, the 12-year-old kid, is shocking. So for sure, there was less to do. Absolutely. Right. On a daily basis, 100%, that was less. And the reality of that was different back then.
So there's less to do back then, and now it feels like there's too much to do. I feel like you're saying, I see people and it looks like they're doing too much. It looks like they're taking too much responsibility for their kids, like that kind of stuff. But what about all the people who are doing that who aren't overwhelmed by it? Like, here's the question, right?
Yep.
In the first 5 years of your diagnosis, do you know what your A1Cs were?
Yeah, almost all of my life, they've been between 6.5 and 7.
Now,
so it wasn't perfect,
right?
But back then, that was good.
First of all, it's very good. Do you think you were having a lot of lows that you weren't aware of?
No. So I can remember not significant ones. Mm-hmm. I can remember a few, and my parents were involved, right? Like they were the ones that were there and walked through them with me, but it wasn't a tragedy. It wasn't like traumatic, right? It was, this is part of the disease. This is what we did. This is how we're going to do it.
Yeah, I love the attitude. The attitude you're describing is the one I've used through all this. But were you using regular and MPH in the beginning?
Yes, it was N, and then R came around the same time.
How long do you think you did that for?
Yep. Yeah. So, yes. And that was it. And then I added in Lantus. I don't know do you know when Lantus came about?
I mean, it would have been right around there. So it's
right. So it was
more about
that was
how
probably
long.
That was probably 2 to 3 years into my journey, I would say, where we added in Lantus.
And did your parents pull out like any of the weird food? I feel like you said this, but I'm not sure if I retained it or not. Like, was there like a honing of the diet? Yes,
but not for what I can remember being a long time. But yes, there was like less sugar because they thought it was, a distraction to me, and less sugar. But I think once I had figured out that those things were normal and I could handle it and my life was going to be okay without sugar all the time, they went back to their normal too. I hear you on the devil's advocate piece, but I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful that it caused me at 12, because again, 12 is tough anyway. Sure. It's like the beginning of middle school. That's a tough time anyway. But at 12, it was like, I can do this and I know I can figure it out. And to be clear, I'm not saying that parents these days aren't doing that. I think the overwhelm of all of the options now, and what I would call a little bit of it allows the micromanagement is much harder. 1,000 times harder.
Because there's information?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And again, information is always a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
I do think there's a line in daily management of how to live with diabetes where some of it is too much and it disables their ability, the child's ability to make the decision in real time. Did you experience that?
Well, I think you and I agree mostly, right? And about that, I think that if unless I'm being sensitive, the way you're saying it, I feel like will rub up against people. And
I hear you.
Yeah. And so, but I don't think you mean it the way they're taking it, if that makes sense. Okay.
So I also see the overly positive is super annoying in the first 2 years of diagnosis where these parents especially are drowning.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely drowning. I totally get that. I guess I want to say it because I want them to know that there is another side. And you see that all the time. You hear that constantly in your guests, right?
Yeah.
Once you figure it out, for whatever figure it out means for you,
it's like
there is another side.
Yeah.
And that's why I'll say it again. I think that, yes, there were times when I was 14 and I couldn't eat 8 slices of pizza because this was back in the day when I was diagnosed, I was told I can never have cake again on my birthday, right? Like this was then, that was that time where they didn't even understand. Back to the Lantis point, there wasn't a long-term anything in management. There wasn't a view of long-term and how it was just very what you're eating now. That was it.
Mm-hmm.
That was never explained to me. So, and it wasn't because it wasn't understood at that point. So I do think that's kind of where the boat sometimes tips too far the other way, especially for the kid trying to make those choices and make the decisions in real time.
Do you think that your parents were drowning and you didn't see it?
Yes, I've chatted with my mom a lot. I remember her just sobbing, right? That day. My paternal grandfather had, again, wasn't called type 1 at the time, but type 1. He was on 70-30. Have you ever? Yeah.
He had the sugars.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So,
gotcha.
And I can remember very vividly him saying to my grandmother, my grandmother yelling at him for sneaking a brownie and him saying that piece of bread or that sandwich I just ate causes my blood sugars to go higher than the brownie does. And like he knew, at his core, he knew it.
Yeah.
No one in the medical community ever told him that before he died. That was not confirmed, but like his instinct of knowing his body and having figured that out, he knew it. And that's kind of what I mean. Back then, he knew that. And I feel like some of that, if you can accelerate, and again, if we're talking to parents now, right? If you can accelerate their understanding of how that affects them with the information you have, that's what I think is the magic sauce and what's so important, especially at this age, especially for juvenile diagnosis.
I believe that that's what the podcast offers.
I agree.
Yeah, is a fast forward.
I totally agree. And you've done an amazing, amazing job of that. And that's kind of why I wanted to share your attitude about it creates the reality truth. I do think that's true in a journey with diabetes.
I just want to say that I find a woman near my age through a good microphone telling me I'm amazing. I found that very, I like that a lot, just in case you're wondering. I'm going to go tell my wife about that later. It was the good
microphone that put you over the edge.
Might. I'm going to, first of all, if my wife ever says anything nice to me again, I'm going to put her in front of a microphone so I can hear it like that. And I was like, I am amazing. So now, by the way, you didn't even say me. You said something else and I just took it right in. I was like, oh, no, but being serious, I don't know if I wasn't being serious just then,
I was just going to say, you already were serious.
But being maybe more serious, I think that everybody's going to be drowning.
Yep.
And it's almost like there's no option to not be. But how quickly can we get you out of the water, stand you back up and dry you off again?
Correct.
And get you into the point where you're like, I can jump back in that water now and swim.
Correct. So
yeah.
You'll love this. When I was in high school, I think it was maybe 15 or 16, I went to diabetes camp for the first time, which again, having that back in the day was life-changing, right? And in the way that it is now. And I hear wonderful stories told on the podcast about what it is now and how, just like streaming data and all the things that are now an issue there. But a girl I met there was local, and we created a group that we called Tandy, Teens Advising Newly Diagnosed Youth. I came up with that myself. Thank you. Now,
how old were you when you came up with that?
This might have been the beginning of my marketing career. I'm not sure.
Okay.
I was like 15 or 16. So literally what we did is we told our local doctors, so by the way, I never really went to an endocrinologist until I went to college. So I had an exceptional PCP at the time who, again, for what we knew back in those days about diabetes and the reality of it, she was amazing for the first few years. She walked me through it. She was a godsend. But I didn't actually get to a real endocrinologist. Anyway, so we had told our doctors, this other girl had an endocrinologist at the time, that we would, if there were families who were drowning, as we've now called it, right, in that phase, that we'd be happy to talk to them. It impacted me so much at that age. If there's parents listening, an opportunity to do something like that. I remember, it makes me choke up, actually. I remember this one woman, she was like petting me almost. It sounds weird, but I walked into the room to meet her and they had already gone home. They were like 2 weeks in, right? And they had already gone home and she was back for an appointment. And her daughter was in with the doctor and I went and sat with her and she was like just touching me. And I remember she looked in my eyes and said, "You're normal. Like you're okay." And I said, "Yeah, she was like, "Oh, you're like a normal kid and you're doing normal things and you're willing to come talk to me about how my kid can be normal." She was like, "Oh, you're normal." You know, at the time I'm 15 or 16, I was like, okay, this lady's touching me. It was a little weird. The impact of that was dramatic for me. I mean, she had and to your point about knowing that my mom was drowning, I had no idea until that point. I had never thought of it that way.
Right.
And the ability to say, yes, I'm thriving in life. I'm running track, and she was that's all she asked me. She didn't ask me anything about management of my diabetes. She was like, "You can do normal things, right? You can go to a sleepover," like all the things that you talk about regularly with newly diagnosed parents on your podcast.
If you take insulin or sulfonylureas, you are at risk for your blood sugar going too low. You need a safety net when it matters most. Be ready with Gvoke HypoPen. My daughter carries Gvoke HypoPen everywhere she goes because it's a ready-to-use rescue pen for treating very low blood sugar in people with diabetes ages 2 and above that I trust. Low blood sugar emergencies can happen unexpectedly, and they demand quick action. Luckily, Gvoke HypoPen can be administered in 2 simple steps, even by yourself in certain situations. Show those around you where you store Gvoke HypoPen and how to use it. They need to know how to use Gvoke HypoPen before an emergency situation happens. Learn more about why Gvoke HypoPen is in Arden's Diabetes Toolkit at gvokeglucagon.com/juicebox. Gvoke shouldn't be used if you have a tumor in the gland on the top of your kidneys called a pheochromocytoma, or if you have a tumor in your pancreas called an insulinoma. Visit gvokeglucagon.com/risk for safety information. It's also super interesting how without the data, without the ability to understand really where the management should be and being able to see it and make meaningful decisions about it, how much more the problems were wrapped around like, is my kid normal? Are they going to be able to do this? Like that kind of stuff. And now you think, well, if I just get the data where it belongs, then obviously the rest of this will just come with it.
Yep.
Yeah.
And to the glass half full piece. So at a similar time in my life, and again, this is, great. I'm so grateful that it all kind of played out before I went to college and left home and really had to do it on my own. A friend of mine was diagnosed with cancer. And I remember she had leukemia, and we did a car wash to raise money for her. She was going to St. Jude's, right? And again, this is back in, early, late 99, probably 98 or 99. And I remember we had all these, I organized that we did this car wash for her. So just to raise money for her family to be able to go to St. Jude's. And I remember thinking, I know this sounds ridiculous, but I remember thinking, I'm so glad I don't have cancer, right? Like it was such a end. The only option is death. I mean, not to be dramatic, but that was like the only way that story was told then as well, right? But it was I remember glass half full thinking, I'm just so glad I don't have this. That's so much worse, right? And I have a disease that's manageable, and how lucky I am to have that and see that. And would I have known that without seeing my friends go through cancer? Probably not.
Yeah, you were offered some health perspective that people don't get sometimes. And don't you think too that, and maybe rightfully so, but don't you think that everybody starts out life just believing like that problems don't happen?
Yep.
Like, yeah, I know what life is. I go to school and I make friends and I get a job and I meet somebody and I get married and I have a baby and I'll probably buy a house. Now, I'm sure they're like, and I rent a cargo box that I live in. But, but like I buy a house and then I'll get older and we'll do some stuff in between. I'll probably go on vacation. And no one ever, when they're making that picture in their head, says, my kid's pancreas will probably stop working when 100%. They're 12.
Yep.
Yeah. Yep. It's interesting.
It is.
Because it's so obvious if you look around the world.
Yep. That
a lot of people have different issues.
Yep.
And you can say like there's more now, or there's always been people with problems.
Correct.
Right? Like we called it something different back then. Women got the vapors, in the 50s. You can't get her too upset. She'll get the vapors. She gets upset. Now, I imagine we'd call that anxiety or depression now. Like, do you know what I mean? Like stuff like that. But people have been struggling with the same things throughout time. I'm sure there was a sad caveman who was just
100%. Who couldn't deal with life. Yep.
I don't want to go beat that lizard over the head with a stick. I can't. I'm not leaving this cave. But it's funny that we don't ever tell anybody about that. Like it really is Pollyanna the way we raise our kids.
Yep.
Like you might be president one day. No, you won't be.
Yeah.
And
and I think, not to go back to stroking your ego again, but like,
but let's. I'm just kidding.
The honesty is the unlock. The honesty is the unlock. It was for that woman who said, "Oh my gosh, you're normal," back in 1998 or whenever that was, right? Mm-hmm. And the honesty now that the mental health toll on the other side is just as dangerous as your blood sugars. Also true, right? It will continue to play out, but the honesty, and your podcast is such a great example of that, right? The medical community was never honest about diabetes. It was a problem that it wasn't honest enough, right? And I've heard many guests talk about, you go into the endocrinologist and you're like, yeah, everything's great. For years, that's all they weren't looking at anything in real time. Yeah. So it was like, how's it going? Good. Like everything's great. You don't have any high blood. Nope. No. Like it was so not truthful or not honest.
But that stuff hasn't changed though. Like overwhelmingly, like my father-in-law is in the hospital right now. Right. So I took the day off yesterday. I went and saw my father-in-law in the hospital. And I basically had to do the same thing that I had to do with my mom, that I had to do with my brother recently when he was in the emergency room. Like we got there, I said, "Hey, what's going on?" "I don't know."
Yep.
"What are they doing?" "No idea." I said, "You've been here a day and a half. You have no answers at all?" "No, they just gave me an ultrasound." I'm like, okay. So I went to the nurse and I said, "Hi, I need to see all of his chart."
Yep.
And she brought it over. We went through the chart. I said, "Okay, these are the 3 outstanding questions. What's happening right now for these 3 things?"
Yep.
"I don't know." I said, "Who knows?"
Right.
"Well, the doctor knows." I said, "That's fine. I'm going to go sit over there and talk to him. You go find the doctor."
Yes.
I need answers to these 3 questions.
The honesty of "I don't know" is just as important.
Yeah.
In these conversations, you have to, why didn't I say no? Like, I had a high blood sugar. Like, what are you talking? You're talking about it like it's perfect. No, of course I had a high blood sugar. Yeah, that's very normal. I ate something incorrectly. Like whatever. Of course I did.
The honesty back and forth is amazing. But just to cap off this point, if you go back to my father-in-law and my mother-in-law and ask them what's happening, they think things are happening.
Yep.
But nothing is happening.
Right.
And they'll just keep him there, keep hydrating him, or whatever they do to pretend they're doing something. They'll run 1,000 tests on him, bill Medicare, and then send him home and he'll die on his sofa.
Yep.
That's what's about to happen if somebody doesn't step up. So my wife's like, "Look, my brother is his medical proxy. I don't want to step on toes.
Oh my gosh.
But everybody's just staring.
Yep.
And no shade on any of them. I just feel like they don't, like, you should have seen the fear on my mother-in-law's face when I said, I'm going to go get the nurse and get this worked out. I don't know what she thought was about to happen.
And why it would be bad.
Oh my God. But it looked like she thought I was going to go get a priest, tell him I didn't believe in Jesus, and then kick him. I mean, like, she was like, you can't do what's about to happen. I'm like, I'm just going to go ask the nurse where we're at. And, it was fascinating. And then I went and got a marker. And I said to my wife, because she got better writing than me, I'm like, write our questions on the board, write your phone number underneath of it.
100%.
Yeah.
And the concept that maybe the next day you have 3 questions is just as much of the honesty that, like, we all need to bring to this. And the levity of it, like, it's okay that of course you don't understand. Of course you don't understand how to calculate carb counts yet. Of course you don't.
Just ask somebody. And if they don't give you a good answer, ask someone else.
Correct. And if you don't feel like it's working for your body, or it's not working the way the doctors, whoever the people are, telling you that it's going to, ask questions. That's when you need to be vocal enough, right? And so my husband is like definition of growth mindset. Do you know the concept of growth mindset?
No, maybe not.
So there's like Carol Dweck wrote a book years ago. It's fascinating, right? So there's people who, if your growth mindset, are the curious question askers, and always the ones looking, and their insatiable quest for learning and understanding more. The opposite is fixed mindset. I would say generally at my core, I hate to admit it, I'm more fixed mindset. But back to the glass half full, I believe having diabetes, the diagnosis at that age, forced me to see the learning opportunities in a different way. Instead of just saying, and again, you can get that from anything. It doesn't have to be to your point with your in-laws, right? Like, that adversity in any sort can happen in any sort of way. But if your reaction is, okay, like, I'll just get what I get, but what they're telling me is not how it's reacting in my body, and you don't then ask the questions about how can I make it work for me, you'll get to your point, you get nowhere. The industry doesn't advance. The medical community doesn't understand more if they are allowed to just keep saying, you were 180 yesterday, that's horrible, and you're going to have all these complications. Like, that's not true. It's not true. Right. The 180 for one day, that's not, and I still hear it today in the basics of what they don't know. But the concept that the medical community can't say, we didn't know that, or we don't understand it, is fascinating. And the reason I say it about your podcast is I have talked to many of them in the last 2 years. There are medical staff who said they've learned about diabetes from you. And that is such a shift, right?
It's also panic-inducing to hear.
It shouldn't be, because that means they're asking, but it shouldn't be, because that's the right, in my mind.
I'm glad about it. I'm very glad. Yeah. But I'm like, how did you get to that position and not know this already?
Correct. But that's
the problem.
Look, I have this conversation. My brother's an orthopedic surgeon and my sister-in-law is an internist. And, every doctor will admit there's a point where you pick your specialty and the rest is a little bit fuzzy, like what you learn, and that's true in any career, right? But especially in the medical community. So the reality of how that shows up, a quick story, which is relevant and probably will resonate with a lot of people. When I was pregnant with my first, I had this top-notch, high-risk doctor for my pregnancy, obviously for being diabetic. And he was exceptional. Like, my C-sections he's a great surgeon, like award-winning, right? But he said at one point, we went into a regular appointment, and he was looking, this is the very early days of the Guardian CGM. So Medtronic, I had Medtronic I held off on the pump for a long time. I went on it to have kids. So that, and that was late, right? So back to my growth mindset, I probably should have, I was asking questions about a long time before I actually went on it. But that was when I actually made the leap. So that was early on in the Guardian CGM. So he's looking, and he basically like saw a day where my blood sugar, and it was the beginning of and you've talked about this on the podcast, right? At the beginning of second trimester, where the insulin needs massively change quickly in the midst of pregnancy.
Right.
So it was in the midst of that. And I had 2 days probably averaging like 170, 180. And he literally looked at the chart and said, "Are you trying to kill your baby?"
Oh.
That's what he said to me. And I'll never forget, my husband was like, "Who the heck are you, dude? Like, what are you talking about?" And I literally said back, "No, I'm not. I'm doing everything in my power to have a healthy baby. And I believe those blood sugars is my path to getting there." Like, no, do I want that every day? Will I have that every day? No. But that's a reality of the disease. And it doesn't mean I'm doing something wrong. I know that that's bad. And you'll see those next 2 days were better. And we've upped at that point in pregnancy, you're upping insulin dosages like you honestly would not believe. It's insanity.
A significant leap in insulin. You can't just make it blindly one day. You got to watch it play out for a second.
And no, I haven't done this before. This is my first pregnant. Like, of course my blood sugar went high. Yeah. I didn't know what else do you think was going to happen? Like, it's just part of the path.
Katie, there would have been maybe 5 better ways to get that point across without making you feel like shit. And that's you know what I mean?
Yes. The shame and you're doing it wrong, back to the mental health toll on parents especially, is the heart I have these days, and the people and conversations I choose to join on the diabetes topic. And back to my Tandy days, right? And that woman who was like, "Wait, what? You can do normal things?" It breaks my heart to see that they're ever shamed for trying to figure it out and getting it wrong. And I believe that in life, but especially in a medical journey.
Well, it's so interesting how common it is for people to be judgmental.
Yes.
Like, that's just like, it's everyone's first step. Like, I have a situation where a lot of people get to see what I think, and they don't get to see it all. They get to see a piece of it, then decide like, "Oh, here's who he is." And so I have a lot of experience being, taken incorrectly or taken out of context, or, people hearing me say one thing, but not hearing me see the rest of it, that kind of stuff. And I always wonder why you would jump right to the idea of like, "Oh, that's wrong." I think it's because people like to feel right.
Correct.
And when they see something that they don't agree with, or that they know not to be correct, through their experience, it brings this amazing feeling of being on top.
Yep.
I guess, and like, "Oh, I found somebody who's wrong. I'm right. I get to feel right when I tell them. I get to act virtuous that I know the answer and they don't." Like, it's really, the virtue signaling is starting to calm down in the world, but it was so
really
fever
bad.
pitched
really
for a while.
Bad.
Yeah. Like, "Oh, I know the right thing to say." I mean, do you remember when something happened in France and everyone on Facebook put a French flag on their face?
Such a good example.
Like, what a great moment. A bunch of people who've never been to France, don't understand France, don't know what was happening, don't understand anything about, what was it? Like, did a terrorist kill a cartoonist?
I think it was in a train station or something. Yeah.
Oh my God. Like everybody, like suddenly every white lady understood the plight of France and everything. No offense, white ladies. You're fantastic. You're my bread and butter. But I mean,
yeah.
White ladies are my jam, just so you know. But when you guys act like it's that thing.
Yep.
It's that like virtue signaling. And if you understand what virtue signaling is, it's you trying to show the rest of the world that you're on the right side of something.
Yep. And it's dangerous.
It doesn't have to be real, by the way, because if I say, look, it's a long way to go to say, like, if I say to somebody, look, a lot of people ask me, like, is this too much insulin? Am I using enough insulin? Is this more insulin than you see other people using? I will say, you need to meet the need.
That's whatever not the right question. Right.
Right. Whatever the need is, you need to meet the need with insulin. Now, is there a reason? Like, I don't know. Do you have PCOS and that's why your basal's 2 units an hour and maybe something could be done to help that?
Yep.
Yes. But in the moment, if I tell you, wow, 2 units an hour does sound like a lot, then everybody that hears that thinks that there's too much insulin they can be using, and then they don't use enough, and then they have horrible long-term consequences.
Yep.
So,
and if you bring it back to the 12-year-old kid. That's so dangerous to say those things in that place, post-diagnosis, for them to hear adults saying those things is dangerous.
Oh, you're using a lot of insulin.
Yeah, right.
Here's another one that
if you're not in my position. Like, yeah, right. What?
And by the way, the other thing that'll happen is then somebody, like, not just somebody who eats low carb, but you get on the fringes of that group of people, they'll call me a carb pusher, or he is an insulin pusher. I'm like, okay, all right, listen, make your own podcast. Leave me the fuck alone. But
seriously.
So what you're telling me is that if a person needs 30 units of insulin a day, I should tell them to go eat dust or die. Like, there's no in between, apparently, right? Like, or the other one that pops up all the time. Using insulin makes you insulin resistant, and you're going to need more insulin.
Oh my gosh. I've heard you talk about this before.
That might be true for some people, but it's not
generally
1-to-1.
Yeah, that's not generally the case.
I used insulin, so one day I'm going to need more insulin. It's not that simple. There's metabolic reasons, and it's a bigger conversation than that. And so you can't say that out loud, because that leads to people not using enough insulin, which leads to people's neuropathy and having needles put in their eyes and things cut off. And like, you have to understand the big picture when you're talking.
Yep.
And anyway, so if I say one of those things, then I get hit with, somebody's half-assed opinion of my thoughts. Meanwhile, my thoughts at this point are some probably 1,500 hours of conversations. If you've heard all of that and you disagree with me, then go ahead.
Yep.
But like, you can't hear me say one thing and go, oh, he's wrong. Like, you didn't even hear the whole thing. I don't know. Anyway, this context is important for the other people on the other side, the people who are living with diabetes, like, because you hear these little bits and pieces of things and people run in directions. Once they get information. They're like, oh, this must be true. Then you've lost them. They're gone.
Yeah. And to the growth mindset, my husband has taught me so much in just the being curious. But like, it goes back to, there's a quote, I don't know who said it, but to get knowledge, you should study. But to get wisdom, it's about observation and curiosity, right? So to acquire wisdom is to actually be asking the questions. Like, it's not about having all the answers. Back to the doctors, right? The doctors who, that's what they learned in med school. And then they found a specialist path and they haven't really revisited that. That doesn't answer what's happening with the patient at this point. Like, that has to be observation and honest conversation. It's shocking to me that that still exists in such stark ways.
Is it possible you were quoting Proverbs?
Is it biblical? I don't know.
Yeah, it might be. Because I thought for certain it was going to be Ben Franklin.
Let's go with that. Ben Franklin once said, I don't know. I'm horrible I'm like this with songs too. I can sing every word, but I don't know what the song's called.
Get an electric car. I've got stock.
Usually with the Bible, I can do it though. I don't actually think that's biblical, but I'm going to look it up now.
All right. Okay. And I have to be careful. I was going to say, you have to keep wondering, right? You have to stay thirsty and keep asking questions, because this thing's going to shift. Like, you can hear Katie grew up in a completely different time with diabetes than those of you right now are growing up in. And with the shifts that are going to come, they're going to come much more quickly, probably because of AI and things like that.
Absolutely.
Like, you're easily going to be able to look back 3 years from now and somebody's going to be like, oh my God, you're using the Omnipod 5.
Right. Yep.
Yeah. But how come you're not using the Omnipod 9?
100%. It's like iPhones. Like, oh, you don't have the one that came out just yesterday? No.
Yeah.
No, I don't.
Does your pump not know the difference between the 3 different pizza places that you go to?
100%.
Mine does.
You can't calculate that. It just doesn't automatically know. You just scan it at the register.
Yeah. Don't you have Vision AI?
Yes.
Can't you just go in there and say, hey, this is my blood sugar? Oh, actually, you already know my blood sugar. This is me giving away a little something that I know about Katie for the future.
I've heard you imply that. Can we put it on earrings? Where it comes out through your earring, like your blood.
You'd like it to whisper in your ear, or you want your earring? No, to get your blood sugar?
A fashion statement earrings.
What about it? Wait, what are you saying?
What
am I not following?
An external read of your blood sugar, like it's coming regularly
through your
out.
skin. It can get your. Yeah, I
like
don't.
the
I've
sugar
seen,
pixel, but on earrings.
You would just like, oh, I see what you're saying. This is like when I said to my wife, it would be great if we could put a warning light on your forehead for when you're upset.
Yes. It's like, please don't talk to me. You should not say these 5 things right now. It just should show up on your forehead or a t-shirt.
I just want her to glow different colors so I know what to do.
Yes. And this goes to in the reality of a partnership in diabetes, bringing us back here. Like, yeah, if he knew what my blood sugar was, there isn't the comments of, oh, you must be high, right? Like you must be going high, right? You're being a jerk, right? Your blood sugar must be high. I'm like, nope, look right here.
No, I'm good. I'm glowing green right now. It's all good.
I'm glowing green. You can't blame it. This is just me being pissed. It's
Listen,
not my ear. It's not.
I don't
my
think we're
sugar.
gonna have to be able to turn it into earrings ever, but I am sitting in front of the little globe that does that right now. It's on my desk, and Arden's blood sugar is green right now.
Oh, good.
So I know she's in range that I chose.
I love
for it to be green.
That technology is so smart. And I know they're all listeners of your podcast. So props to all of you. It's just such a brilliant thing.
This one's so simple. It's called glucose. And I
saw something about it recently. You like it the best?
Oh, it's fantastic. I mean, Sugar Pixel's excellent too, but
yeah.
Glucose is so out of sight, out of mind, still in your face.
Love that.
Yeah, listen, give me 1 second. I never do this, but I have an offer code for that. So hold on a second to see if I can help people. It's glucose.com/juicebox.
Awesome. I'm going there.
I'm a fan of it. It hooks to your Dexcom information, and then you set the ranges, and then it goes different colors. Like if you're low, it'll go to red. If you get urgently low, it'll flash.
Fascinating.
Yeah, we have one in our bedroom. It's really nice.
I love the commentary now on the feedback of like sugar pixels and stuff. It cracks me up. Like they all have names for them. You know, like people have multiple in their house, and the one's name is Bob and whatever. Like there's all these, you know, Bob is better at is quicker. Like his Wi-Fi works quicker.
Listen, 15 years ago, no lie, I was on one of my first calls with Dexcom, and I said, hey, I have a clock hanging in my kitchen. It would be fantastic if it had color or a number on it for Arden's CGM. Yes. Is that not possible?
It's so smart. So this was your idea. What you're saying
it wasn't is a lot of people had this idea. It's the people who followed through and did it are impressive. You know what I mean?
I agree. And that's back to, I hear you on how we started off, right? I don't ever want to say that information is never a bad thing, but I do worry about the balancing of the ship going forward, because it's hard. It's already hard. It was hard in 1996 to deal with the reality of that.
So, can I give you the other perspective of it?
Yeah.
I think it's easy, and I like the data, and it makes it all easier for me.
I agree.
Yeah. And if you don't go through the hard part, you don't get to the easy part.
Yes. And yes.
Yeah. So if you play it safe, you'll sit in limbo forever.
Correct.
Like I was explaining to someone the other day, I was like, I'm not being boastful, but I was on a business call about something, I'm going to partner up with an AI company is what I'm going to do actually. So one day, Katie, if everything goes correctly, by the time this comes out, there's a product that's going to be available that you can hook your CGM data directly to, and you can ask the AI questions about diabetes.
Oh my gosh. So real time, what's happening that day for you.
And it'll also have access to, in the beginning, it'll have access to all of the management episodes of the podcast as well.
Oh, no, that's so awesome.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Oh my gosh, talk about cutting edge technology.
I hope so.
You'll just be in the room with us.
Well, they tell me that one day it'll be able to respond in audio, like it'll talk back to you
with
if you
your
want it
voice?
to, and it could be in my voice because they'll have me sampled so many times they'll be able to approximate my voice through the AI.
Oh my gosh, I speak for everyone who's listening right now on your podcast to say that that's a brilliant idea. Yeah. Like you you hear all the time jokes about you come thundering through people's.
Well, if Justin's listening, it sounds like that would be a good idea. But I was on a call with the gentleman who started this business along with his wife, right? I was trying to explain to him, like, it needs to be very seamless. I said, because people are going to ask it complicated questions. And these are knowable things. What I said was, there's a moment, I don't know when it was, but I told him, I said, like, I'm not boasting, but I'm hard pressed to think of a diabetes situation that you couldn't just randomly drop me into with my daughter that
totally
I'm not
agree.
completely comfortable with and I know the answer to immediately.
You've done podcasts like this, right? Like Ask Scott or Ask Arden.
I'm through it. I have the 10,000 hours that he talked about in the book.
100%.
Yeah,
you do.
I'm good now. And everybody else can get there. And the secret is that listening to the podcast, it counts towards your 10,000 hours.
Interesting.
And that's not something that I would have imagined until I saw it. Saw it happen. I see it happen every day. Do you know I wake up every day to 4 or 5 messages online from people who are like, oh my God, this is me. My A1C is this. My life is so good. Thank you to the podcast. Thank you to this Facebook group. Like every day. Like I'm not kidding. And
you're literally changing lives.
It makes my life easier. I swear, like it's easier to go through life. I've gotten to the point where I'm hard pressed to think of something that could happen diabetes related where I'd be like, I don't know what to do. Like even this morning, Kelly woke me up and she's like, Arden's low. And I looked at the Dexcom. I was like, she's not low. And she's like, what? I'm like, she's not low. She changed the CGM before she went to bed. Like this isn't low. And then it did something that it's been doing lately and she lost data. And Kelly's like, I can't go back to sleep now. And I'm like, no, it's okay. The data's going to come back in like 10 minutes and she's going to be in the 90s. And Kelly's
you were right.
Oh, 100% right. Yeah. And then when it happened, I was like, see, you could have been asleep 10 minutes ago. And she's like,
to really bring it back around, that's why you and what your podcast does for the rest of us makes you confident enough to say what you said at the front end, which was, I actually think this is easy. I acknowledged, I think it's still hard for these for people in various stages of the journey. If you are willing to learn and be honest at whatever part that is in your journey, it does get easier.
Let me ask you a question. What makes you think that people are struggling?
I hear it. They say it. I mean, I think they say to you a lot that they're struggling.
So you hear it on the podcast? On the podcast,
right. Yeah. Meaning the reality of what it took away in their life. Like, I can't do this. I can't do that. That's what I mean when I say struggling.
Do you not think that the podcast attracts people with a story like that to tell? Imagine if your story was, I got diabetes and it made total sense to me. My A1C's always been in the 5s. And to be perfectly honest with you, I don't understand what all the fuss is about. Right. Like imagine that was your actual honest story. Do you think you'd like ring up a podcast and say, I want to come on and say that?
No.
Right. So, but don't you imagine there are people who have that reality?
I don't think there's many of them. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah. I know more people struggle than the internet allows you to think, because back to my bread and butter people, what you're seeing is a lot of very motivated people with time to look deeper. Yeah. You know what I mean?
That's fair.
And they're going to learn and get this stuff. And I do think that when they first come on Facebook or when, sometimes when they come on the podcast, they're lost and they're looking for help. And you can be confused into thinking that that's how everybody is. Not much differently than if there's a bad thread where 5 assholes are going crazy. You're like, everyone on the internet's a jackass. I'm like, it was really just those 5 people.
Totally.
Yeah. And so I do wonder what the makeup is of the different buckets of people.
That's true.
I do generally believe that more people are struggling than going through it easily. But the reason I would say what I said earlier, and I'll be happy to say it again, is that I think this is a game of hope, and it's a game of looking at somebody doing what you can't and trying to emulate them and saying, like, this person's doing it. I bet you I could do it too. I think that's partly why I'm so honest about it, because I really was lost in the beginning.
Yep.
Like really lost and crying and upset and 100% sure Arden was going to die and that it was going to be at my hand and and all of that stuff. And today I can confidently tell you that there's very little about this I don't know.
Yep.
Yeah.
the way I see it is I would add on to what you're saying. I agree. Although my line would be there's very little about this I think was horrible. Meaning not that it didn't feel hard, back to my word before, when I was going through it. But if I look back on all of it, the things that it taught me or made me in my life outside of diabetes are much more significant than the negatives. I think honestly, the only at this point, and I know people won't believe this, but I truly mean it when I say I think the only negatives is maybe the way I see food, and not in a eating disorder way, in a, like, I'm not super into food. Like, I'm definitely not a foodie. Not that I would have been, but like, I kind of see food as like carbs, right? So just because that's just what it was. That's what it was to me.
Do you think you were able to absorb this great perspective and because it was going well for you? Because if you were really struggling, then you wouldn't be going around. One of the things I hear people say that I can agree with is I think I'm healthier with diabetes than I would have been without it, because it's forced me to look so hard at my health.
Yep.
Right. And at the
and
things
understand
I
your
eat
body.
and understand my body and all the other things, which I think is a really valid statement. But I think if your A1C is 9 and you can't afford your pumps, and, you know, and your husband just left because he couldn't take the pressure of your kid having diabetes, I think it's hard to sit around and go, I have some clarity and perspective I'd like to share with you.
100%. Which goes to your point. I only say that because I think I figured it out.
Right.
And I got to the point where I thought, I agree with you that it's largely easy because I knew how to do it.
Now, my perspective is that everyone can figure it out.
I agree.
Yeah. And it takes a different amount of time for people. That's fine. It'll be a rockier road for some. But I think if you keep getting good information, if you have your hands on reasonable tools, how to use them, and you don't give up, I think you get to it.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
I totally agree.
That's what I'm selling.
Yep.
I'm selling hope and something to strive for. And I like the idea that people lay down their stories and say, look, I struggled, but I'm okay now. Or I struggled and I can't find my way out of it. I want to hear everybody's story, because in everyone's story is someone else's story.
Yep.
Then they can relate and say, okay, I could find my way through this. I mean, when you hear a woman come on recently who, you know, was homeless with diabetes.
Yeah.
And when she talks about it, she's like, I'm going to have a house next year. And I'm like, and you're like, God damn, she's living in her car talking about, I just need to get to a hotel. And then she got to a hotel talking about, I'm going to get to a house. Then she got to basically like a halfway house situation. Like, you could see her not giving up. And she had a terrible upbringing. She had no, I don't want to say no right. It's the feeling of what I want to say, but it's not the intent. Like, there's no way anybody would have bet on her.
Yeah.
And still, every time somebody threw a concrete wall in front of her, she's like, I can get around this.
100%.
Yeah, that's the attitude you need, I think.
And it is hope. It's buried. It's like unleashing hope. The way I see it is like, I think like if you think about it as a mount, like when you get to a mountain or the summit of a mountain, it's beautiful. It's really great to see, but you're actually nourished and like filled up in the valleys that you're looking back down at. Right. So like, yeah, I mean, I had valleys. I had a seizure in front of my kids. The one and only low ever in my whole life was in front of my kid. Like, so I've had the valleys for sure, but it taught me or unlocked something that I hadn't gotten to, or opened up a path of questions I hadn't asked.
Right.
And got me further ahead. But like looking back down the valleys is the only way the mountaintop looks gorgeous, I guess, is the way I would say it.
What was the most horrifying part about having a seizure in front of your kids?
I feel, as I said before, have gotten to a beautiful place where I know my body well enough. I like knew it was happening slowly and I couldn't stop it. Yeah. So I knew I was low. It was not a funny story, but kind of funny. It was my first trial. It was like a trial time of another CGM. Mm-hmm. So I was on that Guardian early on, and then I was trying another one and I didn't love it at all, but that was kind of the end result for me. So once the ambulance had gotten there, it started alarming that I was low. I was like, okay, well,
it's hilarious.
This is about 25 minutes late. And
hey guys, I got a device over here. It's letting me know there's a problem.
The paramedic was like, what is that thing? like, well, it was supposed to be telling me my blood sugar was low. He's like, oh, okay. Well, that's not working.
What's that thing? It's late is what it is.
It's really late. Very, very late.
So when you say you couldn't stop it, do you mean you were out of control of yourself, or no matter what you ate, it wouldn't stop?
Yeah, I knew it was like, I almost knew it was coming. Like I knew that would be, I felt like it was out of control. I never passed out. I was conscious the whole time, but not able to stop the seizure. But like I was eating. I mean, I was fixing the low.
And it just
as I was beginning to seize. So like mentally, I knew what was happening. Yeah. So that was the worst part. And I knew my kids were seeing it, which was.
How old were they? Ish?
6 and 8.
Yeah, they probably.
It was like 4 or 5 years ago.
Do you think they remember?
They do, but we've also talked about it a lot.
Oh, okay.
Back to the glass half full. It makes me emotional too, telling the story anytime. So if a neighbor of mine, I was voting and we were going out to the parking lot and a neighbor of mine was there and helped me. And the next morning we chatted about it afterwards. And again, I never went unconscious. So it was just like I seized and then my blood sugar kind of caught back up and I was fine and communicating with them for most of it. So, but the next morning, my oldest, her question was, why did all those people help you? Like they didn't know you. Who were those people and why, like who were the helpers?
Oh, that's nice.
And because she observed like these people who she knew the lady who was our neighbor who happened to be there, but there were all these other people that came up and helped me. And she said, why they don't know you? Where did all these helpers come from? That was her one question about the whole situation.
That's lovely.
And I was like, they could see that something was wrong. They could see that you needed help. And I was able to give those answers, right? Wow. In the midst of trauma, but it's not a trauma for them anymore. We talk about it a lot. We've talked through it, what it means and how it happened and what that means in my body. And they're aware. They know the signs.
Do you know the amount of time, Katie, from when you went out to when you were back?
I wouldn't have known if somebody didn't tell me, but it was about 4 minutes.
4 minutes. And you stood right back up, or were you shot after that?
I was sitting by that point.
But I mean, were you like Aladdin coming out of the lamp in that Disney movie? Were you like 20,000 years? Like, were you like right back to it, or were you
a little bit? Yeah, a little bit, because I was like, I was asking questions, like where'd they go? Right? Like, where'd my kids go? Because somebody had taken my kids. And I was I had one of those applesauce packets. That's what I was treating with when it started. And I was like, I have another one. Like I kept telling my friend, there's another one in my purse. And she's like, I got it. It's fine. Like, I'm like, oh no, I know what to do. Like I have the sugar here. I'm ready.
I was wondering if because it sounds like you were on a dimmer switch and somebody's turning you down slowly, and then they shut you off. And then I wondered if you popped right back onto 100% or if they brought you, or if you came back up slowly again.
I wouldn't say it was 100%, but I was back in it. I was like, where's my low treatment? Yeah. I was like, where is it? And where'd you bring my kids? And then the ambulance, so they had called an ambulance, which was like right around the corner. And so this paramedic came over and he was like, you can't just skip back into full on Genie, right? Yeah. Like, he's like, no. Like, you need to sit here and answer these questions. I'm like, no, I got it. I know what happened. I'm good now. Like, here I come. I'm coming back out.
It's funny. We talk about timing and amount so much on the podcast, right? This is a great example of if you were out for 4 minutes.
Yep.
It's very possible that if you just would have started treating that low 4 minutes sooner, you would have gotten very low, but not had a seizure.
Yes.
Yeah.
And again, I knew, and it was like a plummeting low. Mm-hmm. But again, I had treated twice before it happened. Or maybe not. I knew I was low.
Or maybe not. Maybe it was one of those like dropping a lead weight in a bucket thing.
Correct.
And it was going to have to go down before the splash happened. Who knows? Like,
yeah.
Oh, it's so interesting.
But I never, it was not dramatic. Like I never left the scene. You know, the paramedics were like, you can't just leave now. And I was like, I'm fine. I'm good now.
Yeah. I'm good.
Everything's fine.
Somebody turn me back on. I'm all good.
To your point, I love the Genie analogy. It's so true.
I just wondered, like, did you pop out like with all that energy, or did you like slink out like at the end when he was sad? You know what I mean?
No, I was not. And people, I mean, I've seen stories or heard them on the podcast too of, like seizures can affect you for 24 hours. But I did not have that experience.
It feels like there was just a blip in there where there just wasn't enough sugar in your blood just for a second. Yeah.
And like I said, I knew I could feel it, like it caving in, like the darkness caving in a little bit. But I was like, no, I'm not. It's not full darkness. Like I've already treated it. I know what I'm doing.
Was there any feeling like I can fight this, or did you just let go?
No, there was feeling I could fight it. My friend, again, a neighbor, acquaintance, like she wasn't a good friend of mine, but
not like your sister-in-law or something like that. Yeah,
correct. It was not. She's not like a close person, but she was literally like an angel in disguise that day. She said I was standing, like seizing and standing, holding her. Like I wouldn't sit. She was like I wouldn't sit down. I was aware and I was standing for the whole thing.
Isn't that crazy? Wow.
Isn't it? Yeah, it's crazy. Like, and again, I don't remember like the 3 to 4 minutes for sure. But I knew up until that point. And for most of it, I was standing until she sat me down.
That's fascinating. It really is. Yeah. I appreciate you sharing that. I really do.
No problem. Yeah, it doesn't make it better. I guess my point is it's not, when I say it hasn't all been, sunshine and roses by any stretch. We've all had the crappy parts. But anyway, the learning from that. And I soon after was like, I've got to just switch to I was on Medtronic. I stayed on Medtronic for too long, right? Like a pump that wasn't really giving me all the things I needed at the time for me.
What do you use now?
So I'm Omnipod now.
Omnipod you use now. Do you use the algorithm or you just use a manual?
Algorithm.
Okay.
Full on. I'm full in now. Thanks to you.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't think I needed all of it, but it's because I hadn't had a good CGM experience up until that point. And I felt like I had tried. Back to the curiosity, the growth mindset. I'm like, but I tried all of them and they just didn't work. Like, not that was an excuse, but
no, it's how people's brains work. Like I did that already. It didn't work out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's ignore that it's 15 years later now,
100%.
Right. By the way, you would have as good an experience likely with a Medtronic CGM and a pump at this point. Like it's, you know what I mean? Like they've everything's come a long way.
Absolutely. Yep.
I always give Medtronic credit for going first.
I agree.
Yeah. And
that's why I stuck with them for so long.
Yeah.
For years, they were the leader by far. They really were.
Yeah.
And their like all the things you hear are true about them.
Right.
Their customer service was incredible. Like it was really, I had a few like lost a pump in the ocean situations, like all the things in early days, trying to live my life and do both of it and be a poster child of pump living, and they were wonderful. Absolutely wonderful.
Yeah.
And like, I have nothing bad to say, but I do think there was a time where I was missing out on some other experiences by sticking with it, right? Like, because there were so many new things.
Yeah.
There were so many new options and I had not tried them.
Yeah. Other companies had sped forward. It's funny. You just said you lost your pump in the ocean. I'm now thinking of calling your episode Drop in the Ocean because that's kind of what you've been describing the whole time.
Oh, that's good. Yep.
And then it sounds like you actually dropped your pump in the ocean. So
I'm embarrassed to say that has actually happened twice.
Oh my God.
And again, talk about Medtronic customer service. Like I had them both. I didn't lose them. Well, I did lose the second one and then found it. But yeah, like extreme ocean. I'm a adventurer, outdoor sport enthusiast.
So Katie, I just need to know, when you dropped the second one, did you think not again?
Yes, 100%. And I was like, I am not losing this in the ocean. Because the first time I had it, it was just completely water saturated and salt. It was like really bad. And they replaced it. I mean, again, God bless them. They completely replaced it.
That's funny.
Anyway, but yeah, I was like, I'm not losing this. Like, if I lose it, the answer is going to be no.
I'm scrambling on the floor of the ocean looking for it. Did you find it in the surf?
It actually came. No, it was like in the tide. Like it kept coming. I could see it. I'm like, oh no, I don't even care if I get swept under right now. I'm going for my pump. But it was completely destroyed twice.
I just love the idea of that split second where you're like, oh my God, I did it again.
This is happening again. I have to make the same phone call to their customer service team and admit that this happened twice.
Yeah.
2 times.
It's funny. I don't think about this a lot, but I've had this thought a couple of times. If you fall off a building by mistake, do you not have a couple of seconds where you're like, oh, I'm going to die because I fell off this goddamn building? Like all I had to do was not step there. And my life went, and is that how it goes? Because I know I'd be complaining all the way down in my head. I'd be like, what a fucking idiot I am.
I'm so stupid for have gotten to I'm now in this place. And how did I get here? Yeah. 100%.
Oh, yep. I just imagine that's the first thought that goes through everyone's head who falls by mistake. Like, oh no, what did I do?
You're totally right. You're totally right.
I want to say that I also love videos on TikTok of people falling off of ladders. They're fantastic. Do you ever see the one where the guy's like putting up the Christmas decorations and he falls and he just crushes his balls on the rung, that he flips backwards and the ladder comes around and hits him? It's fantastic. Yes,
I have seen that. We just Christmas vacation-esque. Yep.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
It's usually Christmas lights.
Also, I want to say,
be clear,
when my wife says, why won't you put Christmas lights up there? I always tell her the same thing. I'm like, if there's a God and I get to like the pearly gates, I am not telling him or her and everyone else that I meet for infinity that I died putting up Christmas lights. I was like, I don't want that to be my end.
It's not worth it.
No.
It's just, there are things.
Because you'll talk about it too. Everyone's left behind. Like, do you remember when, like a couple of years ago, people like, do you remember when Scott died putting up Christmas lights? Like, it'll be ridiculous. And
100%.
I don't want to remember
that is not,
that way.
It's not okay.
No.
That's not the way you're going to die.
I'm 1,000,000% not okay with that.
Nope.
Okay.
You can make this choice before you're falling.
Yeah. All I can do is say, look, just put them on the bushes. It looks fine. Like,
it's great. The bushes, this small tree, shrub in the front yard, that's good. Yep.
Who doesn't love a decorative bush?
Who doesn't love a decorated bush?
Yeah.
Why
does it have to be the eaves of the patio where I'm clearly going to slip and fall? Or, by the way, even if I don't fall, you know what happens then is Christmas ends. It's freezing outside. And she's like, you have to take those lights down. I'm like, wait, I don't want to be that cold.
No one wants to do that in early January.
Yeah.
Not any person in the world.
And then I get like I'm just going to tear them down and throw them away and tell her they stopped working so that I don't have to take care of them. I hate wrapping them up afterwards. The whole thing upsets me. It ruins Christmas for me. This is not what this is about. We're going to go now, Katie. I appreciate your time very much.
No problem. Thank you so much for the opportunity and for all you do in this space.
Oh, you're very nice. And it's my pleasure. Hold on a second. All right. Okay. Give me 1 second. Yep. A huge thank you to one of today's sponsors, Gvoke Glucagon. Find out more about Gvoke HypoPen at gvokeGlucagon.com/juicebox. You spell that GVOKEGLUCAGON.com/juicebox. Arden has been getting her diabetes supplies from US Med for 3 years. You can as well. usmed.com/juicebox or call 888-721-1514. My thanks to US Med for sponsoring this episode and for being longtime sponsors of the Juicebox Podcast. There are links in the show notes and links at juiceboxpodcast.com to US Med and all of the sponsors. Mark is an incredible example of what so many experience living with diabetes. You show up for yourself and others every day, never letting diabetes define you. And that is what the Medtronic Champion community is all about. Each of us is strong, and together we're even stronger. To hear more stories from the Medtronic Champion community or to share your own story, visit medtronicdiabetes.com/juicebox. Don't forget, we still have Mark's conversation at the very end. It's a terrific kind of mini episode, about 10 minutes long, that goes deeper into some of the things that you heard Mark talking about earlier in the show. If you or a loved one was just diagnosed with type 1 diabetes and you're looking for some fresh perspective, the Bold Beginnings series from the Juicebox Podcast is a terrific place to start. That series is with myself and Jenny Smith. Jenny is a CDCES, a registered dietitian, and a type 1 for over 35 years. And in the Bold Beginnings series, Jenny and I are going to answer the questions that most people have after a type 1 diabetes diagnosis. The series begins at episode 698 in your podcast player, or you can go to juiceboxpodcast.com and click on Bold Beginnings in the menu. And now my full conversation with Medtronic champion, Mark. Mark, how old were you when you were diagnosed with type 1 diabetes?
I was 28.
28. How old are you now?
47.
47. So just about 20 years?
Yeah, 19 years.
What was your management style when you were diagnosed?
I used injections for about 6 months, and then my endocrinologist in the Navy recommended a pump.
How long had you been in the Navy?
see, 8 years up to that point.
8 years.
Yeah.
I've interviewed a number of people who have been diagnosed during service, and most of the time they're discharged. What happened to you?
I was medically discharged. Yeah, 6 months after my diagnosis.
I don't understand the whole system. Is that like honorable?
Yeah. I mean, essentially, if you get a medical discharge, you get a commensurate honorable discharge. I guess there could be cases where something other than that, but that's really how it happens. So it's an honorable discharge but because of medical reasons.
And that still gives you access to the VA for the rest of your life, right?
Correct. Yeah, exactly.
Do you use the VA for your management?
I used to up until a few years ago when we moved to North Carolina. It just became untenable. Just the rigmarole and process to kind of get all the things I needed, for diabetes management. It was far easier just to go through a private practice.
Was it your goal to stay in the Navy for your whole life, your career?
It was. Yeah. In fact, I think a few months before my diagnosis, my wife and I had that discussion about, staying in for the long term. And, we'd made the decision despite all the hardships and time away from home. That was what we loved the most. So that's what made it that much more difficult.
Was the Navy a lifetime goal of yours or something you came to as an adult?
Lifetime goal. I mean, as my earliest childhood memories were flying, being a fighter pilot, and specifically being flying on and off aircraft carriers. So, watching Top Gun in the 80s certainly was a catalyst for that.
You've taken off and landed a jet on an aircraft carrier?
Hundreds of times.
Is there anything in life as exhilarating as that?
No, but there's a roller coaster I rode at, I think it was at Cedar Rapids up in Cleveland, Sandusky. And they've got this roller coaster that takes you from 0 to, I think it's like 80 or something. You go up a big hill and you come right back down. So the acceleration is pretty similar, I would say, to a catapult shot.
I'm going to guess you own a Tesla.
I don't.
Okay.
I'm a boring guy. I got a hybrid RAV4. I get made fun of. I get called, my wife says I drive like a grandpa. I'm a 5 miles per hour over the speed limit person, no more than that. So yeah, in the car, I'm boring, Scott.
So you've never felt a need to try to replace that with something else?
You can't replace it. It's irreplaceable.
That's what I thought.
So up until the point where someone, buys me an F-18 or allows me to get inside a 2-seater and fly it, you can't replace it.
How did it make you feel when you saw, or maybe you haven't seen, a gentleman named Pietro has his large aircraft license. He's flying for a major carrier now. He has type 1 diabetes. Does that feel hopeful to you?
Yeah, it does. When I was diagnosed, that wasn't a possibility. The FAA prohibited commercial pilots who had type 1 diabetes. But I think it was 2017 when they changed their rules to allow type 1 diabetics to be commercial pilots. And part of the reason they did that was because of the technology advancements, specifically in pump therapy and pump management. So I don't have any aspirations of going to the commercial airlines, but one of my sons who has type 1 diabetes very much wants to be a commercial pilot. So, in that respect, I'm very hopeful and thankful.
Yeah. Do you fly privately now for pleasure?
I do. Yeah. One of my favorite things to do is fly my kids to the different soccer tournaments I have all over the Southeast U.S. So last week, my wife and I and 2 of our boys flew up to Richmond for their soccer tournaments up there. And Charlie, who's my middle child, has type 1 diabetes. So, if I can combine flying, family, and football in one weekend, to me, I think I've just achieved Valhalla.
So then it sounds to me like this diagnosis was a significant course correction for you. Can you tell me how it affected your dream?
Well, I guess 3 words come to mind. First, it was devastating. Everything I had done in life, everything I'd worked up to that point was just taken away in an instant. And I was not prepared for that at all. The second emotion was it was scary. I hadn't thought much about life outside the Navy, certainly not life as anything else but a fighter pilot. And Heather and I were getting ready to move to France. I was going to do an exchange tour with the French Naval Air Force. So we were taking French classes. So pretty quickly, I had to reinvent myself. And then probably the most important thing at the same time that all that was going on, I had to learn how to deal with type 1 diabetes and how to manage it effectively. The third thing that pops into my mind, I guess, is challenging. New daily routines I had to establish, first with injections and then eventually, through pump management. And then learning how to count carbs and recognize highs and lows, how my body reacts to blood sugar trends based on exercise and stress and those types of things. And my goal at that time, and it still is today, is to leverage technology and make sure my habit patterns are effective so that I take diabetes management from the forefront to the background.
Have you had success with that? Do you feel like you've made the transition well?
I have. I mean, I believe in continuous improvement, so there's always more to do. I will say the technology since I was diagnosed, specifically with pump management, it's just incredible. It takes less of me intervening, and it's really done by the pump itself and by the algorithms through the CGMs. And to me, again, that should be the goal for everybody, is to not have to focus so much on the daily aspects of type 1 diabetes management. We should let technology do that for us.
What else have you found valuable? I've spoken to thousands of people with type 1 diabetes. The one thing that took me by surprise, because I don't have type 1 myself and my daughter was very young when she was diagnosed, I didn't really understand until I launched this podcast, and then it grew into this kind of big Facebook presence. I heard people say, I don't know anybody else who has type 1 diabetes. I wish I knew more people. But until I saw them come together, I didn't recognize how important it was.
Yeah, I think similarly, I didn't know anyone with type 1 diabetes growing up as an adult, up until when I was diagnosed. And then all of a sudden, people just came out of the woodwork. And when CGMs first hit the market, certainly within the last 5 years, it's amazing to me and my family how many people we've noticed with type 1 diabetes, simply because you can see the CGM on their arm. Mm-hmm. I mean, I would say a month does not go by where we don't run into someone at a restaurant or an amusement park or a sporting event or somewhere where we see somebody else with type 1 diabetes. And the other surprising aspect of that is just how quickly you make friends. And I'll give an example. We were at a soccer tournament up in Raleigh this past Saturday and Sunday, and the referee came over to my son Charlie at the end of the game and said, "Hey, I noticed you were wearing a pump." And he lifted up his shirt and showed his pump as well and said, "I've had type 1 diabetes since I was 9 years old. I played soccer in college. I'm sure that's your aspiration. And I just want to tell you, don't let type 1 diabetes ever stop you from achieving your dreams of what you want to do." And this gentleman was probably in his late 50s or 60s. So just having that connection and seeing the outreach and people's willingness to share their experiences, it just means the world to us and just makes us feel like we're part of a strong community.
Yeah. So would you say that the most important things are strong technology, tools, understanding how to manage yourself, and a connection to others?
Yeah, technology for sure, and knowing how to leverage it. And then the community, and that community is your friends, your family, caregivers, for me, the Medtronic Champions community, all those resources that are out there to, help guide the way, but then help you keep abreast on, the new things that are coming down the pipe.
Yeah.
And to give you hope for eventually, that we can find a cure. You
mentioned that your son wanted to be a pilot. He also has type 1 diabetes. How old was he when he was diagnosed? So Henry was diagnosed when he was 12 years old. It was just at the start of COVID. We were actually visiting my in-laws in Tennessee. We woke up in the morning and he had wet his bed. And several years before that, we had all 4 of our boys tested for TrialNet. So, predictor of whether or not they were going to develop type 1 diabetes. And Henry and one of his brothers tested positive for a lot of the indicators. So we always kind of had an inclination that there was a high degree of possibility he would develop it, but we always had it in the back of our mind as well. And so when that event happened at the beginning of COVID, we had him take his blood sugar on my glucometer, and it was over 400. And so right away, we knew that without even being diagnosed properly by an endocrinologist, that he was a type 1 diabetic. So we hurried home to get him properly diagnosed in Charlottesville. And then we just started the process, first grieving, but then acceptance and, his eventual becoming part of the team that nobody wants to join. How old is he now? Yeah, he's 15 years old now. When's the first time he came to you and said, "Is this going to stop me from flying?" Almost immediately. So like me, he always had aspirations of flying. In fact, he, out of all 4 boys, wanted to be in the military. And that was a difficult part of the conversation, and maybe something that we don't talk about as a community. But there are some things you cannot do as a type 1 diabetic, and that's a hard fact of life. And unfortunately, joining the military is one of those hard and fast things. You cannot join the military as a type 1 diabetic. So that was very difficult for him and for me and my wife to get over. Then we also started talking about being a commercial pilot. And so I saw that same excitement in his eyes because, like me, he can be in an F-18 or a 737 or a Cirrus SR-20 that I fly and be just as happy. Yeah. So he still has that passion today and still very much plans to eventually become a commercial pilot. I appreciate you sharing that with me. Thank you. You have 4 children. Do any others have type 1?
They do. My oldest twin, Henry, has type 1 diabetes, and my middle son, Charlie, has type 1 diabetes as well.
The boys are twins.
The oldest two are twins. One has type 1 diabetes. My middle son, who is not a twin, has type 1 diabetes.
I see. Is there any other autoimmune in your family?
There isn't. I'm really the only person in my family or my wife's family that we know of with any sort of autoimmune disease, certainly type 1 diabetes. So unfortunately, I was the first to strike it rich and unfortunately pass it along to two of my sons.
But celiac, thyroid, anything like that?
Nothing. We're really a pretty healthy family. So this came out of nowhere for myself and for my two sons.
That's really something. I appreciate your time very much, and I appreciate you sharing this with me. Thank you very much.
Anytime, Scott.
Learn more about the Medtronic Champion community at medtronicdiabetes.com/juicebox or by searching the hashtag Medtronic Champion on your favorite social media platform. Thank you so much for listening. I'll be back soon with another episode of the Juicebox Podcast. The episode you just heard was professionally edited by Wrong Way Recording. WrongWayRecording.com.